reported in and around the Antonievsky Bridge, but that's the best I had. So Portland, you dropped. You told us that with a 1.5 resolution, you could follow a railway car, and then that if you wanted to follow a given railway car time and again, that would probably require more. But the reason why I'm asking you this is that Craig told us that one of the big questions he was asking himself was how many railway cars are there in Russia at the moment? If you had any idea for this, well, how to do it, that would be interesting. He's not answering, is he?
I'm sorry, was that a question aimed at me again? I'm sorry, Ben. Your microphone comes across extremely quietly compared to everyone else.
Okay, I'm gonna try to speak louder. It's a bit late and the baby's sleeping, so I can only go so loud. What I was asking you was, so how easy would it be to count the number of railway cars present nowadays in Russia within, a reasonable margin of error, say 10%?
Extremely easy, but slightly expensive and somewhat time consuming, because basically I would have to buy satellite imagery covering every known or suspected railway line on the territory of the Russian Federation, and I would probably have to include any railway lines that have termini on both ends on the territory of the Russian Federation and which pass through a third country. So it would take a couple days and it would be fairly expensive, but it wouldn't in any meaningful way be difficult to do.
By fairly expensive, you mean like $1,000 or?
Yes, on the order of a couple of $1,000s.
Okay, well, we need to see when is Craig's birthday.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that you could do it with a fairly high margin Google Earth images. But the problem there is that you've got to seeing the same rail car in multiple different locations, because the whole area is imaged over an extended period of time. And without having high enough resolution to be able to distinguish one car from the other.
Yeah, but the reverse is true as well, because you might miss some railway cars. So some you may double count, and some you may not count at all. But that would still put you in the ballpark.
I mean, you would be in the same order of magnitude. Like, you wouldn't be off by like 10 times, but you could be off by like half to 5 times.
Yeah, that's half to 5 times is a bit too much. Too bad. $1,000 it is.
Yeah, sorry, man. Like, I can probably do some digging and see if I can come up with something on some reasonably reliable source. But That's probably the best I can do right now.
Well, I guess one possibility would be to settle on, I mean, somebody who knows logistics well enough could probably tell us that, say, at a given time or on a given day, most of the rail cars of a railway system of Russia actually would probably be in that region. So there would be no point trying to estimate the number of cars in all the other regions, because you would get most of it, or you could even have more what do you call that, parcellary, the word in French, how do you say échantillon in English, samples, more sample based approach where you just take one image out of 100 along the railways, and you get a number, and then you just multiply it by 100 and you get the total. Sorry, just thinking out loud. Oh my God, we have Portland. We can ask him the question. You remember how a few months back or weeks back you said that you didn't want to talk about the destruction of the bridge over the Dnipro, the Antonievsky Bridge?
I remember saying I didn't want to talk about the Kerch Bridge anymore, but Antonovsky is still very much a topic for discussion.
Okay, so I'll get to it, but I've seen that you had raised your hand, so I'm wondering maybe you have something to bring to the table.
Oh yeah, so I found a 2012 remote 2012 annual report from the Russian railways, reporting they have 20,618 locomotives and 252,900 freight cars, including 54,200 owned directly by Russian railways and the rest owned by subsidiaries and affiliates. Now that's 10 years old, and it's a Russian government source, so, you know, take it with a pinch of salt, but it's probably not total fiction. Did I drop out again?
No, good. We can hear you.
Okay, good.
Sorry, Ben will come back in a minute.
Apologies. I saw that I dropped Portland when you said that you found a map from, I don't remember when, of the Russian railways, and then I dropped. It was too interesting, too intense. Can I be so rude as to get you to repeat this?
Sure. So I found a report from 2012. It was the 2012 annual report for Russian railways, reporting they have 252,900 freight cars, along with 20,618 locomotives, of which 52,500 of the freight cars are directly owned by Russian railways, and the remainder are owned by subsidiaries and affiliates. So, yeah, I think that's probably not wildly incorrect, even though it is a Russian government source and should be taken with a pinch of salt.
Can you send me the reference?
Sure I can.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I mean, hunting for...
Is that the total amount of railway cars, like, in Russia? Because presumably most of them on any given day are doing stuff like, you know, moving food around, and it's not like they could all of a sudden put that into, you know, into a military operation, if that's the total amount in the country.
Yeah, that is the total amount owned by Russian railways, which has a fully verticalized monopoly on rail transport in Russia.
But yeah, they're not only doing military stuff, and I guess mostly not doing military stuff. They're mostly involved in civilian businesses, and probably and that's why they're interesting, because they're the sinew of the Russian economy, and probably one of the main bottlenecks. If the railways start to have problems, of course the army start immediately having problems, but the army can also be prioritized. So that's a bit of a moot point. But if the civilians and the economy starts having start lacking car and what do you say, rolling stock, that's starting to be a lot more of a problem. Adrian, potentially the one of us who knows the most intimately Russian and Belarusian railways. Go ahead.
Bonsoir, Ben. Greetings from late evening in the Romanian countryside. I just wanted to add a little caveat. Those are impressive numbers indeed, and if you take into account that they're used for regular commercial use and so on. But I wanted to add a caveat to anyone who has taken a train through Eastern Europe, Romania, Ukraine, and I'm sure it applies to Russia even more than in Romania, in Ukraine. You would pass many rail yards with completely broken down freight cars and broken down locomotives and things that basically were built in the 40s and are not fit for almost anything except maybe carrying body bags with Russians back to their homeland. So I'm curious how many of those statistics are actually counting, because I mean, even in my hometown and even in Kiev, when you go in, the rail yard has dozens of these cars that are completely decrepit. And I have a feeling that the bean counters in the Russian government put those as well that are lying in the many railheads in their backwater of a country.
Miko, tell him why he's wrong. Mickey?
Yes?
No. I'm saying Mick with an M.
Oh, yeah, I keep, yeah.
Although maybe you have an idea of why Adrian is probably wrong.
I wasn't following too closely, I'm afraid.
Doesn't matter. Don't worry. I think there's a massive difference between Russia on the one hand and Ukraine or Romania, things like this, is the fact that due to the massive amounts of money that were injected following the 2000 pickup of the oil prices, it's very likely that the Russians have more modern material, and whenever they have material, they have the money to fix it. I'm not trying to say that it's all great. Actually, in the book that I often mention, Putinomics, the Russian railway is singled out as the example of a mismanagement of a public monopoly. So I think that tells you a lot, that out of all the examples Chris Miller could have chosen, that's the one he picked. Apparently, the CEO was just horrid, even by Russian standards. But still, massive amount of money, and it's not totally impossible that the rolling stock of the Russian is in a much better position than elsewhere in well, not elsewhere, but than in Ukraine or Romania or even Belarus. I would say they just had the money to buy new or refurbish.
Yeah, well, that's not encouraging now, is it, Ben? I don't know. I'm just thinking of the pattern of completely misreporting things. But yeah, you might be correct. I don't know. I'm just wondering how much of the Ukrainian rolling stock they stole also when they occupied the south. That's something that upsets me, because for some reason it upsets me more when I know they're working with gear stolen from the Ukrainians.
Well, there's one reason for you to be a bit more upset and one reason for you to be a lot less upset. The reason for you to be a bit more upset is that apparently they also stole a lot of railway cars from Estonia. After I assume what was the first package of sanctions, they refused to return their cars to Estonia, a little bit like they did with the planes to Ireland. They just kept it. But the positive thing is that Craig was telling us that about 15,000 out of the 40,000 railway cars that are currently in use in Ukraine were actually taken away from the Russians. So that's 15,000 out of the 40,000. Unfortunately, he dropped before being able to tell us the story. But yeah, that's well in excess of 30%. Feeling better?
Yeah, feeling better. I see Portland has his hand up. That's why I was silent.
Don't worry, he's not going to slap you with that big yellow hand of his. Portland, go ahead.
So this isn't really scientifically rigorous, because this was like a matter of what I could do from my phone while other people were talking. But Adrian has maybe a bit of a point. So one of the things that I just did was I went and I looked up the biggest rail siding yards plural in Russia, and I compared Google Earth images from their most recent update to Google Earth images from a year ago on the Wayback Machine, and roughly like ballpark 10% of those rail cars haven't moved in the last year. So I don't know if that's representative or not, but it's certainly something that if I was going to do a project like this, it would be a thing that I would definitely look at.
Sounds like something Craig might enjoy.
I'm sorry, Adrian?
I said it sounds like something Craig might enjoy doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Craig might really enjoy this one. A quick question, Portland. Where is that station you're looking at?
There's one east of Moscow, and there's one to the west of St. Petersburg.
Oh, amazing. Like not any place either. Like you would think that if there was one region in Russia where the trains would be working a bit better. That's precisely where it is. Well, that's fascinating. Then the question is, of course, where they counted and the numbers that you pulled out. But I would tend to agree with Adrian that they would count everything and anything just to increase the numbers, and then add 15% on top just for the sake. But yeah, did you say there were 250,000 railway cars in the whole of Russia?
252,900 plus 20. Oh God, hang on.
You said 25,000 locomotives.
Let me look. 20,618 locomotives, which includes 2,543 electric passenger locomotives, 258 diesel passenger locomotives, 7,837 electric freight locomotives, 3,556 diesel freight locomotives, and 6,104 shunting locomotives. So we should count those shunting locomotives out of the total, since they don't actually have the ability to haul freight any great distance. They just exist for moving cars around in a rail yard.
Okay, but Craig didn't give us the number of locomotives in Ukraine, which I guess is rather a good thing. But he gave us the number of a rough ballpark number for the number of railway cars. So, and it was 40,000. So that's roughly speaking 1/6 of the Russian numbers.
Right, but you've also got to consider the total land area of Russia versus the total land area of Ukraine.
Absolutely.
The density of the network, because what you're really measuring is tons of stuff per mile per day.
Basically means that you can, with a smaller area that is in Ukraine, you can get more tons per mile with basically less cars or the same amount of cars, right? At least when I was in Ukraine 2 weeks ago, like the rail lines were pretty busy. Let's just say that, in every direction. It was quite active.
Yeah, maybe I framed that incorrectly, but I think you got the right gist from me explaining it very badly. So, well done to you.
Adrian is a smart fellow, even though he's more of a sentimental kind of guy. He's also smart.
Oh, shut up, Ben. I just love trains like 80% of the guys on base.
Okay, but yeah, so the population of Ukraine is 45 million people. The population of Russia is 150. So you're in a 1-to-3 ratio. There's probably more extraction industry in Russia, so it's natural that they will use more railway cars. And it's also, yeah, the landmass of Russia is considerably bigger than the one of Ukraine. Ukraine is the size of France, and France, if I recall correctly, is 1/17 of the United States. The United States is roughly half of Russia. So there's probably 35 Ukraines in Russia. Sounds right? Sounds like a lot. Anyway, there's, let's say 20.
It's 28. I just did the math. It's 28 Ukraines in Russia.
Wow.
So in order to get the same amount of freight from one area of the country to another, they would need 28 times the rolling stock. But they don't have 28 times the rolling stock. They have 6 times the rolling stock.
Yeah, even if we consider that about 2/3 of Russia is not really usable for human living, that's say 28, let's say 27, it's easier. It's 9. The usable Russia is 9 times the size of Ukraine, and their rolling stock is barely 6 times. So they're in a serious deficit of rolling stock compared to Ukraine. That's back of the, that's not even back of the envelope. That's writing on a metro ticket sort of calculation. But that's good to know. They're not in a position where they can just overwhelm the system. They're probably just have enough rolling stock. And if what you're saying is true, no, sorry, it is true. But what if your intuition is confirmed and a large portion of that rolling stock is actually rotting somewhere in a yard? They could be in for a bit of a problem.
Well, there is also one fairly significant component to this which hasn't been examined, which is that the Russian government actually only owns about 54,000 of those cars. The rest of them are owned by subsidiaries, partners, affiliates, call them what you want. But those are people with compelling uses for their own purposes. So actually, when it comes down to it, the number of cars that the Russian government can devote exclusively to supporting military operations in the Ukraine is actually only about 20% bigger than the Ukrainian rolling stock fleet. That's not so good for Russia, anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you remember just a few weeks before the beginning of the war, there was this article, Feeding the Bear, which was saying, well, of course they have special what do you say, special military trains and teams doing just that, and we all sort of went with well, at least they're very good with trains, but they could be a bit in a pickle. Raver, you don't know anything about trains. You're driving a truck. That's the competition for you.
Actually, in the U.S., there's a whole lot of intermodal freight that moves between train and truck and back to train and back to truck. But no, well, I'm going to throw out a couple of counterfactuals for you guys to consider. So we know Ukraine has to basically randomize its train schedules because predictable trains are predictable targets. So that's going to add an amount of inefficiency. Russia doesn't have to do this, so it leaves us up to the border, so they have an efficiency advantage. How does that play into the ton miles?
It's probably not as big of a problem as you might think, because yes, Ukraine does have to randomize, but Ukraine also has, comparatively speaking, a lot more comprehensive trucking network than Russia has. Like, generally speaking, you only have to cross-load at the border, and then when you get your freight off the train onto a truck to go to the front lines, where Russia probably has to transload several times, because big swaths of their rail network are electrified, big swaths are not, and you can't use the electrical trains on the sections which are configured for the diesel locomotives. It's probably not that big of a deal when you count the number of times you have to cross-load.
Thank you. And then the next point is, how does this all change once the rains arrive?
Unfortunately, I don't know enough about weather patterns in that area of the world, so I couldn't say. You would probably need Craig for that.
I'm trying to bait him to the conversation. Crayfish fishing is one of the most interesting types of fishing. They're called crayfish. They're nice and black, and they have little pincers. Okay, well, that's some fun calculation. Yeah, there's also the question of braking, because but then I might be getting it too much into the weeds. But there's something along the lines of a car will brake every 10,000 kilometers. I have no idea how much. But the more mileage a carriage covers, the more likely it is to break. And if the Russians have something relatively efficient, but which covers a lot of mileage, they increase the probability of braking. And if they don't have the means to rapidly change and repair, and based on what Portland is saying, it's possible that they don't, then a bit of a pickle. Adrian and Raver?
Yeah, Raver's point made me think about something. I don't know about freight, of course, I have no clue, but I've been using Ukrainian passenger trains in the last few months. And they've been running them on the same schedule, basically, without any changes, the passenger trains. And the thing that they are doing, because there's less people running around, is just they run them in wider loops. So fewer trains cover more cities. So they take a little bit longer to get there, but the schedules are predictable, and I'm not sharing any secrets because you can buy the tickets online also, which is something that I respect for Ukraine, because you can still do this in Romania, and we are in the European Union and not at war. Anyway, that's my small gripe with my country. But I'm wondering if after this attack in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, they will be changing the schedules for passenger trains in some way, or randomizing them in some way. I'm curious to ask that for the head of Ukrazaliznitsa when he comes on.
Are you one of those show-offs who pronounces the name of the Ukrainian railways without even breaking a sweat?
I have like 10 Ukrainian words that I pronounce perfectly, and I speak them as often as I can.
Raver, how do you pronounce the name of the railway company in Ukraine?
The Ukrainian Railway Company? I'm American.
Adrian, can you remind him how you pronounce it?
Ukrazaliznitsa.
Raver, your turn.
Yeah, I'd have to really practice on that. My tongue is not trained for those funny European languages. all joking aside, does anybody know how much of the Ukrainian freight system, or the Russian system for that matter, uses intermodal transport?
I would venture not much. Intermodal is a relatively recent solution. Even in France and Germany, it's not very, very common, tends to be limited for fairly long connections. And based on a number of Ukrainian trucks and lorries that you see on the German highway, on the German autobahn, I don't think they take often the train. I really think it's more of an American stuff.
And if I can just jump in, like just from seeing, like I literally never saw in Ukraine a railway car that would have this. I know how they look. They're a bit. They have the size of a container, basically, like something that you could pick up and put on a truck. So I know how they look, and I never saw one of those railway cars in Ukraine. They might be there, but I never saw one, and I've been going there for 7 years.
Thank you, YouTube.
Portent, how do you pronounce the name of the Ukrainian railway company?
Ukrazalitsnya, something like that.
Not bad, not bad. You've forgotten a little bit of something somewhere, but it's not bad.
I probably screwed that up, and I literally learned that how to pronounce that word about 30 seconds ago from Adrian. Hey, do you guys want to hear something funny?
We always do.
So I sent you an archived copy of the 2012 report that I pulled off the Wayback Machine, right? So I just tried to get to the 2013 annual report, which is not on the Wayback Machine yet. I was trying to pull that straight off the Russian Railways website, and it is so riddled with viruses that my phone screams in pain every time I try to open it. So I'm like, I don't know how you load a PDF with viruses, but apparently this one is. So well done, Russia. Well done.
Okay, you're opening a whole world of interest for me, because PDF with viruses is like my dream come true. That's going to be very, very interesting. That should not be possible, but if they manage to do that, that's amazing. Why do you think they would load these things with viruses? Because only the CIA would be interested in this sort of things, maybe?
I have no idea, but like I use a black phone. So I have my security settings like way the fuck up there. So I don't know, like my phone won't even open the document. It just keeps on coming up with error messages to the effect of, you really don't want to do this, buddy. So I don't know if they did it themselves on purpose. I don't know if their security just sucks, but yeah, that's pretty great.
Sniper, I can see you. You're coming up. Sniper?
Yeah.
Do you know to load viruses on
Yeah,
PDF?
sure. I used to work 7 years for Adobe Systems, and I know a bit about this topic. And basically, a PDF is just a container format for data, and you can embed JavaScript or any kind of things in PDF. It's basically just there are like certain things that the PDF can be binary coded or hex coded or whatever, the actual content what you see. But you can also include invisible information within a PDF file, and the format of the container, let's say, allows you to also embed like program code within the PDF file. So it can be, it's actually no wizardy, and it's not a bug, it's a feature. And basically, the PDF can be used in order to transport also other content. And then it's a question of the receiving end, whether how well they analyze the content of the PDF file before actually executing it. From those times where I used to work for Adobe, they certainly have increased the security measures, but the principal structure is still the same. So basically, if you have a PDF file, it doesn't just mean that it's either a picture or text. It's a bit more complicated than that. Just wanted to throw this in. Thanks.
The more you learn. Fantastic. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so the figure for the number of rail cars notionally comes from that 2013 report, but I was reading off another article linking directly to that report and quoting from it. But since I am not able / willing to open the source file and see what it actually says, I think we should take that number with a slightly larger pinch of salt, because that's coming to us, first, the Russians may be lying, and second, whoever wrote this article may be lying about what the Russians said. So, yeah, your guess is as good as mine, guys.
If you ever want to open up something questionable, run a virtual machine and open it there. And if you run into issues, close that server and open up a new one. And that's how you could play around with it. Never open it up on your own hardware.
Yep.
I have a LAN computer at the office, which I use for those sorts of things. I'm just not willing to open it on my phone.
Yeah, I would advise not opening it on any of your personal or office computers. The virtual machines, like, it costs nothing to open up a server. It'll cost you pennies. So.
Raver, go ahead.
Hey, Portland, where is Telegram headquartered? Where are their servers? Because I keep hearing reports of a baby rape video this, rape to death video that, being posted on Telegram, which seems to be really popular with the Russians. Where are their servers located?
I don't have a clue. Maddie, you know?
United Arab Emirates. Sorry.
Dubai.
Yeah, this says Manoon, but that's, I think, is that a suburb of Dubai?
I actually don't know. I know that all of their servers, well, most of their servers, the primary data center is in Dubai.
And I'm guessing Dubai doesn't cooperate real well with trafficking laws.
Dubai is one of the world's most trafficked places. All of the, a very sizable percentage of the workers that are building those new mega cities that look like something from a sci-fi dystopia, those are almost all trafficked.
Hey, Portland, I just want to interject.
Telegram, although yes, their servers may be in Dubai, their brothers, they're called Pavel, Nikolai and Peter Durov from St. Petersburg, Russia. Do not, and I repeat, do not trust Telegram with your personal information. Do not have it on your phone. Use a virtual machine, please and thank you. Like Display said.
Yeah, Telegram's right up there with Kaspersky as people that I absolutely will not trust with any of my digital information. Actually, they won't even run on the black phone.
You guys are making me want to uninstall Telegram, Jesus. And yeah, good point, Portland. I don't know if it's worth asking Dubai about their trafficking laws, because essentially their mega cities were built by more or less slave labor. So, yeah.
Yeah, but legally imported slave labor, please. Carl, go ahead.
Hey, regarding opening the files, I generally support the virtual machine route, but I mean, and if it's just like a Word doc or Excel sheet, another way is just make a throwaway Google account, and import it into Google Docs. And there's nothing that's going to be going onto your own computer. It's all restricted within that browser and that throwaway account, and you can look at things within a minute or so.
Valid. I would be willing to do that, except for two things. One, this is a PDF, and two, I honestly don't care that much about what this report actually says. I think for the level of confidence we can put in these numbers, it is sufficient to take random internet user commentary. He must have opened this at some point. So I wonder if this file was always loaded with malware, or if that has happened in the 9 years since it was put up.
Gotcha.
Guys, there's John Stewart who'd like to join us, but he's, well, I can't because it's a full house. If one of you could just 1 second, that would be fantastic.
I'll drop.
No, it's good, it's good. Somebody sacrificed himself. I think it was, Carl. Thank you, Carl. Thank you very much, everyone. And while John is connecting, I would like to thank you for this conversation, which was not expected and that I find highly enjoyable. John, you can speak.
Hi, yeah, I was just thinking about, I was listening to Portland struggle with the virus problem or issue potentially. And I immediately was thinking about Kaspersky, which I used a lot, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. It was easily the best antivirus tool, and obviously Russian-based company, and the founders are the richest people in the Russian IT world. Still Russian owned, and yeah, just your comments about Kaspersky, I just thought were really interesting, because I used it, as I'm sure many other listeners did, just because it was easily the best. It beat every other virus antivirus software hand over fist for about 10 years. And it was used by the Ferrari, according to Wikipedia, it was used by the Ferrari team until last year. So people were still using it, but it looks like now they've obviously lost a lot of custom, and I can't imagine that company ever get. I mean, who would use Russian antivirus software now? I haven't had it on my computer for about 4 years, but that's just because the company I work for stopped us using our own antivirus protection. We had to use their one, which originally wasn't very good, which is why I got Kaspersky on board on my computer. But they've improved theirs, so I use theirs now. But I wonder if there are quite a few rumors about their connection with the FSB and with the Russian government, Department of Homeland Security, and Kaspersky from all government computers in 2017. And this is all obviously after the original invasion of Ukraine in 2014. 3 years after that. I think I was probably still using it around that time. So yeah, it's an interesting little case study of I guess what was once a really important company that I would imagine is probably going to take a bit of a dive. I would hope so. I used it on the logic that Russia seemed to be where most of the hackers came from, so their antivirus engines would probably be really powerful because they would really know what they were doing, since that's where they were also, game poacher turned gamekeeper kind of idea. But yeah, I wouldn't go near it now.
Thank you, John. Sniper, shoot.
Yep, I will. I completely agree that the Kaspersky was indeed. I also used to use it, but it's quite a while ago. But now comes, as a patriotic Finn, I of course have to plug in shamelessly and mention F-Secure, and I consider them to be absolutely reliable. And they are also Mikko Hyppönen is the managing director, is very internationally famous for his efforts in how would I say, being active in this area. And if it might be a good idea to give them a hint that there is a malicious file, so that they get more information, because the more information they get about all kind of viruses and malware which is circulating around, the better they get. So perhaps just make them happy with a link to that document, and let them know that there's something to investigate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got a bit of an appeal to make right now. There seems to be quite a few people working in IT. If you know of someone who's Ukrainian or worked a lot with Ukraine in IT and would be willing to speak to us about what is the IT culture in Ukraine, I think that would make a great guest, and I'd love to be in contact with that person. So, quick appeal, don't hesitate to send me DMs. Nick, go ahead.
I know a little bit about antivirus software. At one point, about viruses in general. At one point, a colleague and I had a solution for preventing, in this sort of 2007, 2008 timeframe, the most common way to get a virus on your computer was via a memory stick. And a colleague and I came up with a way of preventing this, which the Department of Homeland Security recommended over Microsoft's solution. And I spent quite a lot of the 90s, first half of the 2000s, looking at viruses. I ran a network of about 2,000 PCs on which we didn't run any antivirus software at all, because my conclusion was that basically antivirus software to a first approximation doesn't work. None of it works. When it breaks, when it lets the virus in, people don't get angry. They go, oh, it must be too powerful for the antivirus software. Most people are unable to determine whether their antivirus software is working correctly. And the vast majority of the successful attacks that are made on networks exploit errors in the API of the operating system, which pretty much by definition the antivirus software can't protect against. Though the fact that Kaspersky may or may not be dubious doesn't surprise me at all, because, for example, the McAfee antivirus software only really became popular after there was a publicized virus known as Whale on MS-DOS in the 1980s, which was written by John McAfee. So it's a remarkable. The whole industry is essentially a borderline mafia. So the fact that the Russians are involved in it in an even more nefarious way really doesn't surprise me. So yeah, it doesn't work. It's a great deal of money. People often pay as much for their annual antivirus software as they do for Office, or they would for a Windows upgrade, and it's a complete waste of money. So yeah, something I do know a little bit about in the IT game. As I say, we ran a network of 2,000 computers, and we didn't run antivirus software on them, and we had very few incidents.
Okay, thank you. Raver, you are now.
Yeah, Nick just broke my heart because I have an annual subscription to McAfee. I thought I was doing something good to protect myself and my family. Well, rats. Shit. I just. Oh, does anybody know of any other Russian-centric, Russian-based IT, social media-ish companies we need to avoid?
Facebook?
Index.
Well,
So what is
this
Yandex?
something you will never have to use, don't you worry. It's the Russian Google plus Russian Uber plus Russian whatever health stuff you're using. But that's one of the remarkable thing is that we probably know the names of more Ukrainian companies than we do Russian ones, and Russia has totally failed in its in exporting anything to the public over the past 30 years. This is probably the greatest indictment of Putin's politics and Putin's policies, is that Russia never managed to export anything else than bad vodka, and that's it really.
I sorry for jumping in, but I used to use RuTube, which is the Russian version of YouTube. It's RUTUBE, because occasionally they would have TV on there that was only available on subscription platforms that I hadn't subscribed to in the West, and I just searched it for, and I can see it's still live. I'm googling here in the UK perfectly happily, browsing Russian YouTube. I'm surprised I can still get that. There's quite a lot of file sharing sites that are based in Russia. A couple of famous ones that share academic papers that are normally behind a paywall. Sci-Hub being one, although I'm not sure if that's actually Ukrainian or Russian.
Yeah, but this is just taking advantage of their extremely fast and loose understanding of property law.
Well, Sci-Hub's an interesting one because it's I'm just looking at it now. Kazakhstan. It's they share. It is copyright infringement, but they're sharing academic papers that essentially have been paid for by public funds and then are behind paywalls. It's a kind of a democratizing peer-reviewed research in a way, although obviously not through official channels. I was never sure where that came from. It's Kazakhstan, but it's mostly in English and Russian. I'm sure that there's other BitTorrent sites and others that come from there. I'm amazed how many people use Kaspersky. I was just browsing it, and dozens of American companies used it until relatively recently. And the reason why Trump passed the law that American government departments couldn't use it was because so many of them were using it, which is fascinating. Yeah, so I think the sort of whole IT area has not really been covered that much in the discussion of what's happening in Ukraine at the moment.
I use Sci-Hub. I use Sci-Hub a lot, even though I have quite good library access, because for many publications it's actually quicker to go to Sci-Hub and put the DOI in than it is to navigate the publisher's website. I don't think anybody thinks that there is any connection between Sci-Hub and the GRU. It seems to be a genuine initiative that it helps us get our scientific work done. It's a sort of it's a bit Voldemort. We're not meant to mention its name in public forums, and it does occasionally move around. Sometimes you have to use the Taiwanese domain name, and some countries' ISPs actually block it. When I'm at home in Spain, I can't go to scihub.se until I put my VPN on. So
yeah,
I think it is I actually, one might expect. I wonder if we're going to see the publishers who consider that they're damaged by it, maybe kind of putting some innuendo around about, oh, Kazakhstan, that's a bit near Russia, isn't it? But the White House has announced today that from next year, all American research will have to be freely available with no embargoes. So maybe Sci-Hub will be less necessary for many researchers as a result of that.
Guys, let's try to avoid turning it into a series of advertising for Russian companies, especially those that have an extremely complicated relationship with legality. Let's put it this way, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Kazakhstan's is that a Russian? That's an independent country, isn't it? Kazakhstan.
John,
I don't know. I just genuinely don't know what the status of Kazakhstan is, because there was a university job advertised out there that I thought about going for. I genuinely don't know.
It's a former Soviet republic, just off to the right of the Caucasus.
Nick, Matt is coming up, and there's no one better placed than him to answer the question.
I think they're just trying to bait Maddy to speak now.
Yeah, I think so.
Was that a serious question, or should I answer?
Well, calmly, nicely. Some people discover stuff.
I'm always nice. And the answer is yes. It's an independent country, so stop lumping us with Russia.
Yeah. You're right. Let's start with the basics. When was it? When did it become independent as a nation state for the first time?
For the first time, before Russia was created.
As a nation state?
Well, yeah, Ben. Way before that.
Okay. Well,
it's one of the okay. A little lesson in history. You know of the Golden Horde?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So when the Golden Horde descended into a civil war in the 15th century, one of the many shars was the Kazakh Khanate. The middle of the 15th century. The Russian Tsardom was established in the middle of the 16th century. So 100 years apart.
That's quite true. That's quite true. I always so it's a Georgid descent. It's a Georgid what do you call that? Branch. It's not coming from the other ones whose name I always forget. It's too late. I'm sorry. I'm forgetting my Mongol.
No, not Mongol. It was Turkic. It is still Turkic. So when the Mongol Empire fractured, again, this entire history is heavily taught in the West from the Russian perspective through revisionism. The so-called Mongol Empire the pretty much the entire western portion of it had nothing Mongolian. It was old Turkic, Tatars, Kazakhs, Bashkirs, Uzbeks, and so on and so forth. So this Russian narrative is heavily applied that it was all Mongol to decrease historical significance and influence of all the Turkic peoples. Some of them are still stuck within the Russian Empire, specifically Tatars and Bashkirs and Kalmyks. So yeah, let's we can talk about it in a separate time because I could spend like 2 hours just talking about this. But given that this is MryiaReport, it has nothing to do with Central Asia. Let's not.
Thank you, Maddie. Just for the records, those I was looking for was the Shagatayids, but I guess I must have gotten that wrong. But you're right. Although the Golden Horde is fairly and squarely into the history of Ukraine as well, so there's a relationship.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Golden Horde did invade all of Kiev and Rus. It's the Golden Horde is one of the primary reasons why Kiev and Rus fell.
Yeah,
They visited Romanian lands too for a bit. I wanted to jump in.
Apologies for the war crimes that happened almost 800 years ago. Sorry.
It's okay. We stayed Latin, Muddy. It's fine. They didn't stay long.
Yeah, and you got probably the best character in the whole history of Romania, and I mean, of course, no guy. Anyway, yeah, let's do a Golden Horde special one day. What do you say?
Sure, just let me know when.
All right, I'll put it together. John, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I didn't realize much about the sort of the history of the Caucasus, but there was a significant genocide in the Caucasus by the Russians in the 1870s. I think it's the Abazi people, who I'd never heard of.
Circassians.
Yeah, and several national groups there. I think it's Abazis one, just completely destroyed. I think they went like 1.5 million people down to about 30,000 people, and most of them ended up as refugees in Turkey, I believe, which I'd never heard of. But it's interesting how sort of entrenched that part of the world is, and how responsible Russia's been for those kind of things. It's almost like Hitler said, the famous comment about who remembers the Armenians after the Turkish genocide of the Armenians, and the Abazis, or I can't even pronounce the name properly, literally have gone from history almost. It's fascinating. And they're just one of, I believe, several groups that were genocided in that in the Caucasus around the Caspian Sea at the time.
Yeah, I've only got a couple of. Sorry.
Craver, okay. Okay, I'm gonna mute you just for the sake of, but you're always welcome to come back into the discussion. Oh, yeah, Maddie's still here. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's not Abkhazia, it's the Circassian genocide. 98% of them were killed. Those who survived had to flee to the Middle East, primarily Syria and Turkey. They're still there. Some of them got to return to the Russian Federation after the fall of the Soviet Union. And yeah, they
Maddie, can you hear us? Okay, I'm gonna drop you quickly into the box.
It's probably my fault for coming up to co-host.
Yeah, I would just say, if anybody's just Google Circassian genocide, it's incredible.
Marty,
You know.
we lost your audio. Come back up to speaker. And John, go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, it's amazing that Russia still denies it, and most of the West would never, I'm sure, has never heard of it. I mean, I'd like to imagine reasonably well read, and I'd never heard of it. And 98% of the Circassian population.
Can I
friends.
interject here for a
Yeah.
second? It's telling what Maddie's telling everybody about how Kazakh is not Russian, and if you'll notice, for all our Western facing, got a certain education in high school, university about history. If you haven't noticed, the majority of us are from former Soviet, former Russian Empire states, right? That we're all victims. We're all second or third generation victims of this ongoing ethnocentric empire that's been trying to conquer the world for hundreds of years. And I just need everyone to realize that your history books, of course they're not going to tell you about 1600 Kazakh, 1600, 1500 AD Kazakhs or what have you. But hopefully through the space, you're getting an education on what we were brought up with, what we were taught as like a verbal history, as a lineage of this genocide that's been going on for hundreds of years. So that's all I wanted to say.
Ryan, that doesn't include you. Oklahoma is not part of that. We'll go quickly to Sniper, and then Maddie, you can
No, please
continue
go to
dropping.
Marty first, because he knows about the topic more than I do. I just want to say something which is not so relevant, perhaps. Marty first, please.
Thank you, Sniper. Sorry about this. My Twitter app just decided to crash. Where did you lose me?
Unfortunately, we lost you at the beginning of the Circassian genocide, and you said that they had been expelled to those few that survived had been expelled to the Middle East and could come back in the 90s to. I'm not quite sure where they went back.
Gotcha. All right. So they populated the area that is now known as Republic of Adyghe and the southern part of Krasnodar Krai. The Autonomous Republic of Adyghe is still there. Obviously, the Russians changed their name from Cherkessian to Adyghe, but Cherkess is the original name. Is their native name. It's pretty much like they did to the somewhat forced to the Chechens not to use the Ichkeria name because it has strong connotations of independence. They like giving other nations names that are convenient for them. For a very long time, Kazakhs have a very different name. Like the reason why this was happening because it's in the Russian language. Kazakh and Kazakh, they're like Cossacks. The Russian whatever movement. I don't even know what. Well, I can tell you about this later. It's like paramilitary Russian dipshits that go around and colonize shit. And yeah, they stole the name and then they applied the name to Kazakhs that was very unsavory. It's still used as a derogatory by the Russians. So considering all of that, it's good that people are discovering all the genocides that the Russians.
Maddie, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, especially to ask you this, but can you give us the name that the Russians were using for the Kazakhs, so at least we know what it is and we can.
Kyrgyz Kazakh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you repeat it? Kyrgyz Kazakh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I ever see any of these using this name, I'll find you. It's a joke, but not really. Anyway, so obviously the Cherkessian genocide is one of the most prominent ones because it happened in the late 19th century, and it happened in the European part of Russia. Some of the foreign observers actually managed to take records. What happened in the Trans-Urals regions was never covered by many people. Some of the local Russian records survived, and they're probably still kept in the Russian state archives. But many of the ethnic groups that used to populate Siberia and further areas further east, they got simply wiped out. So yeah, it's a culture, it's a nation full of genocidal history, and to this day they recognize none of them. So obviously Holodomor happened in the 20th century, and probably the most prominent, well, not probably the most prominent one, and even that they refuse to recognize as genocide.
Yep. For a second, I thought we were going to speak about 15th century history. I was quite happy about it. But yeah, that is true. We cannot drop the ball and forget what we are opposing and what the Ukrainians are fighting. Sniper, your turn.
Yeah, basically, pretty much said what I wanted to say, or part of it at least. But I think in the past centuries, it would probably be hard to find any time or any decade when there was not a genocide going on in some part of Russia. And there are many Finno-Greek people in Russian territory, which and their cultures have pretty much been wiped out, and it's really appalling to see. But on the other, I was just about to start a rant about the education of geography and history and so on. How can someone not know it, that Kazakhstan is an independent state? But on the other hand, it's I don't know when individual U.S. States joined United States. So basically, I have no idea, and I don't want to blame any. You can't cover the whole world, or just the same in Asia. I have no idea what's been going on there in the past centuries on a detailed level. But also,
Sniper, I can help you for Asia. Basically, the Chinese did the same thing as the Russians. Okay, that's what I suspected. How would China have become so big if they wouldn't have done something like that? And they are still doing as we speak. But I don't know who mentioned that we all are somehow, or many of us are, from Russian heritage, and also my grandfather was born in Russia. He was born in an area which is now Finland, but at that time it was used to be Russia. So I realized this. It wasn't long ago when I realized that actually my grandfather was a Russian, legally seen. Although he has always, our whole family has always lived in area which is now Finland. Thank you. Thank you, Sniper. John, your turn. But before you start saying something, I want you to know that we love you.
I love you too, mate. I was just thinking about the sort of my education in the United Kingdom, which was, reasonably progressive, and we didn't really hear anything about Russian genocides. I think if you grew up in the United Kingdom and were sort of influenced by left-leaning school teachers in the 80s and 90s, as I was, and then as I became, you pretty much were taught by the sort of people who often wanted to gloss over the obvious negative elements of the Soviet empire. And I never heard about Holodomor until relatively recently. And and then you think about the stuff that you can imagine somebody being educated in the United States during the 1860s. All you're going to hear about is the American Civil War in history there, probably. But in the 1860s, the United Kingdom was very involved in the Black Sea and the 1850s and the Crimean War, and was along with the French, was involved with the whole sort of Russian and Turkish conflict there. So you might expect that, at least as a footnote to that, we would have been taught about Russian genocide in that region at the time. But no, the first time I found out about the Circassian genocide was looking up the backstory of the region to sort of research what was happening in Ukraine, and never really ever really understood the full horrors of the Holodomor at all. People will gloss over
John, can I
yeah.
interject for 10 seconds? I mean, part of the reason, I do love Britain. They're great friends, and I live in a former Dominion, and Tsar Nicholas and King George were first cousins, not second cousins, not far distant relatives, first cousins, and this has the imperialist nature of Russia and Britain kind of glossing over their past in history books does have correlation, let's just say. So yeah, it makes sense. And when you look at, there's a great YouTube channel called Useful Charts that goes through every relation from Charlemagne all the way down, and which most of us are probably related to, by the way. But it has, you can't say glory to the Queen without acknowledging the Russian Empire in a sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very much so, and they were also related to the German emperor who started World War One as well. In fact, he was at royal events I think at the Henley boating events in the 1910s. The run up to the First World War. William, I think it was. But yeah, I think I kind of understand that. I'm just fascinated that something of such significance could be glossed over. Just one, because I think the Circassian thing was just never known about or forgotten about, and then from the perspective of a sort of a leftist teacher, you're kind of covering. You don't want to hear it. You don't want to hear the realities of that stuff. You just want to romanticize the the possibilities of a socialist communist utopia. You don't
But
want to know.
it's not just the left. It's the right was there with it. They were teaching it at the same time. I've had very many teachers that were teaching left, right of center thing. I don't think it's a left or right. I think it's victor versus victim in a sense. Do you understand?
Yeah, definitely, and it works both ways for sure. I remember my first history class at university. I did a thing on the history of Russia, and I had a tutor who described the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution as basically a coup, and I was really angry at him. I was like, no, it's a people's revolution, and you look at the history of it, and it's pretty much a coup. So yeah, I don't know, but I think what upsets me more than the kind of the minute, the different interpretations of things by people. Everyone's going to have their own impression of what happened, but to have such a significant event as an actual genocide just be completely unknown only 100 years later is pretty appalling, isn't it? Really, I think. And the fact that we could still be trading with you can be trading with a whole country that's not acknowledged such things that it's been guilty of, and you don't know about it, it's pretty terrifying, really.
As a Canadian, I mean, we were taught we were the rainbow at the end of the Underground Railroad. We were squeaky clean in terms of our ethnic genocides, and we're not, but we're acknowledging that we're moving forward. We're trying to do a truth and reconciliation to acknowledge what horrid genocide we perpetrated on our native people, and that is the only way you can go forward. You have to acknowledge. You have to sit down and acknowledge, apologize, and reconcile. Only way. Otherwise, it's just another imperial garbage movement. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
I think ultimately that has to be the only way out of this for Russia with Ukraine. But I can't see how it could come about. I can't see what in Russia would allow politically or socially would facilitate that kind of change. Then again, you could have said the same about South Africa in the early 1980s, or Northern Ireland in the late 1980s, and that turned around pretty quickly. So who knows? You put enough pressure on somebody militarily, then I guess change can happen. I don't know.
Thank you. Maddie, if you want to reply to this, then we'll go to Himary. Then Craig came back, so maybe we can give him a quick rundown of the important conclusion of our back of the envelope discussion. And if anyone can, who's not speaking at the moment, except Portland, because you're going to be in charge of the back of the envelope discussion, and Adrian as well. There's a long queue of speakers, so that'd be much appreciated.
Ben, I'll drop down. Thank you for hosting. You do a
Thanks,
great job. Thank you very much.
John.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, Maddie.
I'm sorry, I'm in charge of what? You've given me some small degree of power. Don't you know I'm English? That shit goes to my head.
I thought you were Jewish.
You can be both.
No, you can't.
The oldest continuously occupied Jewish settlement in the world is in Leicester, which is in the English Midlands.
And what happened exactly between 1290 and 1644?
That happened actually in the north of England, and the second most powerful person in the kingdom after the king, his brother was the Sheriff of York, and he was hanged for failing to protect the king's direct subjects.
What are you talking about? 1290 was the expulsion of the Jews, wasn't it?
There was 1290 through. Oh, hang on a second. Let me pull up.
1644.
So there was a formal expulsion, but let me tell you that the Jewish population of Leicester just went underground.
Okay. You know what? This is a fascinating subject. I do want to know more about it, but that's going to be for a private space. Maddie had his hand up, so we'll go for that, and then I will impart on you the great power of you'll be the back of the envelope bearer. That's a title from the 13th century. Maddie, please go ahead.
Just a quick side note, it's okay not to know about other countries' histories, especially if they're pretty far away, because every single country tends to be self-centric, and they tend to teach history from their own perspective that is primarily focused on their own history. So that's fine. What is not fine is when they start researching other countries' histories, they start applying a colonial prism, a colonial lens of one of the oppressors. So if you look at history of Ukraine, a history of Kazakhstan, or history of any other former Russian colonies, or as the hip kids used to call it, ex-Soviet republics. They start applying the Russian view. They frequently cite the Russian sources. They frequently use Russian academics, and that problem is pervasive in academia and policymaking, and it's disgusting. The problem is that it warps the narrative to the pro-Russian side, and it creates serious problems. That's why questions like, is Kazakhstan a real country, keeps popping up every once in a while, which is fine, but when you have to deal with it on a regular basis, it becomes extremely problematic. So what I'm trying to say is, if you're going to research a country's history, take the same approach that you take with your own country. Use the country's native sources. Don't use the sources from one of the neighboring countries or from one of the countries that used to oppress it. So if you're studying history of Ukraine, don't please use Russian sources. They will be full of lies. They will be full of historic revisionism, because that's what the Russians do. They've done it for centuries. That's why I brought up the so-called Mongol Empire, because that's just utter nonsense that was created by the Imperial Russia. So when you keep looking into it, it's even being applied to this day. Like Putin saying that, look at Ukraine, that was created by Lenin in the early 20th century, 1921, which is obviously nonsense. But if you actually go dig into the sources created by the Kremlin and the Russians, that's what they actually say. It's not just Putin. It's all of their sources. All of their sources say that. So yeah, don't use what I'm basically saying. Don't use Russian sources.
Ben, I am completely lost on the hand order.
I'm so sorry. There was crying baby.
I think
no, Himrina's first,
Himrina?
and Greg came second.
Perfect. Sorry for the delay, Himrina. Go ahead. You have to come. There you go.
Hey, my question is actually for Madi. With regard to, he mentioned Holodomor, I was wondering how widely that was actually taught in Kazakhstan, or if he perhaps kind of did some, personal research on it. But I was just wondering about that, or maybe about any of the other genocides that have occurred as a result of Russia's actions.
So it depends what kind of school the person attended. I personally attended. I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. Well, I finished high school in the early 2000s, and that's when I left. The education system was reformed since then, so it's been almost 20 years. It's been a while. Keep in mind that Kazakhstan went through a concurrent genocide with Holodomor. It's called Ashar-Shalik. We lost 50% of our population. So now it's actually taught, but still it's not officially recognized, because we're being pressured politically by the Kremlin not to recognize it, because our authorities are kind of shit scared of what the Russians might actually do if we do recognize it as a genocide. So Holodomor, people are very much aware that Holodomor happened. People are very, very much aware that the Kazakhs went through a concurrent genocide that is locally known as Ashar-Shalik. It was done in the same manner. It was artificially engineered, man-made famine, and it was done to eliminate all the non-Russian and ethnic non-Russians, because we and the Ukrainians kept rebelling against the Russians. So they tried to apply a permanent solution to Russify the lands and get rid of anyone who doesn't want to be Russian. So going back to your question, was it extensively taught in my time? The answer is no. Why? Because I grew up in the immediate, well, not immediate, but in the aftermath of the Soviet education system. I was taught in Russian. We were still using the same books that were used in the Soviet Union. So that gives you a microcosm of how the education system was actually set up in the Soviet Union. None of the genocides were recognized. I had to study extensively history of Russia for some reason while I was a high school student, simply because our government was too lazy to reform the education system in the 90s. That's why I know it so well.
Thank you, Monty. That's really good perspective. I'm Ukrainian, by the way, and I was just curious if it's, how widely it is taught in Kazakhstan. But another thing that I was curious about with regard to Kazakhstan in recent months, we've, kind of seen a shift. It seems like the president has become more emboldened and starting to stray away from perhaps Russia's influence. Am I perceiving that correctly, or do you think that perhaps it's just very surface level at this point?
So if you follow the Russian sources and the Telegram channels, you'll see that there's a lot of propaganda attacks against Kazakhstan. Obviously, Ukraine is the primary target, but I'd venture to say that Kazakhstan is target number 2. They recently announced, like a month and a half ago, they announced that there are Nazis in Kazakhstan, which is a very weird proclamation, but whatever. They're proclaiming that the Russian speakers are being oppressed. They actually started this narrative back in January. If you remember what happened in January, there was a massive spike when the Russian troops showed up to to help the local authorities quell the unrest. They immediately started saying that the local ethnic Russians are being oppressed, and the local Russian speakers are being oppressed, and all that other bullshit nonsense that the Russians love saying. So that gives you an idea. They've also produced a list of countries that they're planning to denazify after they're done with Ukraine. And guess who's on top of the list? Kazakhstan. So
Mazel
that's
tov.
interesting. Yeah. So yeah, when people are saying that we're concerned that NATO is going to get involved, is going to get attacked, don't worry, they have a better target. It's most likely going to be Kazakhstan. So yeah, because it's an easy target. No military allies. Well, technically there is a military ally. It's called Russia. So, but with allies like that, you don't need enemies. And there's a sizable ethnic Russian population, especially in the northern parts of the country. So that's problematic. So yeah, going back to your question, sorry for the little sidetrack, but it was necessary because that explains why President Tokayev of Kazakhstan is actually taking those steps, because he fully realizes what the Russians are trying to do. So if the current regime stays in power, if not even the current regime, if the Russians are not properly punished because of this invasion, if any concessions are made by Ukraine to Russia in this war, the Russians will still simply not stop. They might actually return to Ukraine a few years later, or they might actually go and try to take northern Kazakhstan or the entirety of Kazakhstan. So yeah, if you think this genocide is something what the Russians are doing and they're going to eventually stop, no, unless some drastic measures are applied against them, they will keep on doing it, and they already have a list whom they're gonna do it to next.
Yeah, trust me, Madi. I realize this as an Eastern European and specifically as a Ukrainian. But I just wanted to thank you for contributing in the space. I really enjoy hearing your perspective and just getting a different, a perspective from somebody else that knows the background of that part of the world. And yeah, just thank you always for contributing.
Thank you, Mary. Maddie, I will resist the temptation of asking you who's number 2 on the list, and we will move on to Craig's.
So it's interesting because I was on this space with Madi just the other night, and when he spoke about genocide, something popped into my memory that I had learned and I had read, but I had forgotten. And I went to my library, which is the bookshelf, to be clear. And I opened a book. It was called Wages of Destruction, which is a book that was written by Adam Tooze. And one of the things that I found interesting in that book, back when I was getting my undergrad, I had to deal a lot with political science and foreign affairs. And then I took some graduate classes, and I stumbled across this. And it was something called the genocide of production, right? So just so that people understand, and this is how it relates to Ukraine. During World War II, when Germany had invaded the Soviet Union, there was this myth that Soviet production was beyond anyone's scale and they can build anything, build more, right? This unstoppable Russian juggernaut, right? Et cetera, et cetera. But one of the very untold stories of those years between 1941 and 1943 is that between 5 to 6 million Russians were, or I should say, Soviet states, along with ethnic Russians, were systematically starved to death in sacrifice of production of war materials. Food was stolen, metal was taken, people were deliberately left their homes, they were put into large factories. I mean, these factories were absolutely gargantuan. It's hard to describe the scale. And so that relates to Ukraine because there's this, as Mari had pointed out, there's this kind of like, ooh, Russia is this big behemoth. Russia can do it. In order for it to deliver the machines, the parts, the tanks, the guns, the bullets, the bombs, the artillery shells, they had to kill 5 to 6 million people in order to do that. Now, that's not sustainable. You can't do that forever. It was a pitch that couldn't be sustained, but it was all about trying to manufacture arms for the war effort, right? And my point to that is that is another way that Russia has killed people throughout its history, right? It is not, yes, there are cultural genocides, there are cultural deportations, there are cultural impositions that Russia enforces on its own people, but it's not just that. It's this myth that Russia can produce a lot, can make a lot, can do this and can do that. Everything is fine. So 5 to 6 million Soviet citizens, so at that time, right, not Russians, but Soviets, as the best I can describe them, 5 million of them died in comparison to the United States, where nobody starved to death in the effort to build war materials. And that, I think, is a much darker curtain to pull behind, or at least a much more revealing curtain. So for whatever they boast, for whatever they say, oh, look what we can do, Russia's so great, Russia's so this, Russia's so that, the statistics are absolutely staggering when you look down to the south and southeast of the Soviet Union at the time, especially in Kazakhstan, and further to the east, when they couldn't actually do this without killing their own citizens. They couldn't have achieved any of these things without not only killing their own citizens, but without the supplies of the Americans in trucks and radio equipment. So this myth that Russia, number one, can produce anything outside of that is sustainable, and then number two, protects its own people, and this is a war of liberation. This is a war to protect us. Obviously, the context of Germany invading the Soviet Union is a different context, but it just kind of gets at the heart of the idea. It kind of takes away the veil and rips off any mask that Russia might have had at that time, that it was somehow trying to, it had achieved this logistical manufacturing miracle without enormous sacrifice. Millions upon millions of people were deliberately starved to death to satisfy the needs of production. And that is if you want me to get to the heart of it, that is a society, that is a system that is not built by strength or by cohesiveness of a nation. It is deliberately done by a ethnocentric mass, by a group of people that are willing to do anything it takes in order to achieve a goal. That, I think, is one of the clearest cut examples of beyond cultural genocide, beyond cultural deportations. That, I think, just kind of really gets hard, right? What is Russia capable of doing without hurting its own citizens? And the answer is nothing. It's not capable of doing anything without causing self-harm. And so in that case, it's not actually producing anything. It's actually harming itself in order to protect itself, right? Cutting off your nose to despite your face, etc. So it was a statistic that I had learned when I was in school, and I just thought it was relevant to this conversation in regards to just how little life is taken seriously, within that area.
Craig, it's a suicide pact. Russia is a suicide pact. It's like, hey, you're Russian, go die for Russia. Like, that's all it is. It's like, oh, you're now Russian, go die. Because there's 5 people in Moscow that really want to eat caviar. Go die. And that's all it is.
So I've told some people outside the space of this before, and just because you brought it up, Craig, I was reading one of my old poli-sci textbooks, or an excerpt from a Polish political scientist who had done some extensive writing on the history of Poland and the fall of the Soviet state. And he entered a Polish joke into some of his textbook, but it was a perfect encapsulation of the myth of the Soviet state. And I'm just going to go ahead and trouble you all with listening to it real quick, because I think it's apropos given what you just said. And the joke pretty much goes, an old man went out to the meat market one day in Poland during the end of the Soviet Union, and he comes to a long line at the butcher shop. And as he's standing there in line because there's no meat, waiting, for meat to be provided, he gets a little angry and starts cursing the leader and the party and the government. And the police come up to him, the Stasi, and point, make a finger gun toward his head, and they tell you, "Hey, old man, if you said this back in the old days, we'd just go poof and it would all be over." And he ends up walking home, and his wife sees that he's empty-handed and asks him, "What's the problem? Do they have no more meat?" And he answers, "It's much worse, honey. They have no more bullets."
That actually somewhat made me sad, and yet quite serious. That's a very serious comment to make. But anyway, yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's very enlightening.
It's pretty dark, but I think the gist he was giving was the failure of the Soviet state was that they pretty much lied about any of their economic numbers and their metrics, and everybody lied up the food chain and said, "Yeah, we made our quotas and everything's going good." And when you build your nation state on a foundation of lies, one day everything collapses because everybody's full of crap. And if I have a lot of bad background noise, I may need to go back inside. I can't hear my background noise, so if anybody wants to tell me that's...
I got you loud and clear. I don't hear any background noise, Ryan. You're good to go.
Okay, good. The locusts are pretty bad out here today. I'm enjoying the evening outdoors.
Yeah, but I just wanted to share that story. I'm sure Madi and everybody else has insight to it, but I found it to be absolutely remarkable. I had forgotten all about it, but like I said, that conversation with Madi last night sparked my memory. And that's just one example. That's just one thing.
Before moving on to Daryl and Chris, I'd like to join with my own reading of some great Turkish historian, whose name eludes me at the moment, talking about the Armenian genocide and saying that all genocides are actually a developmental policy. There are economic motives behind them all. Okay, so the subjects tonight. Daryl, can I go ahead? Daryl?
Daryl, can you hear us?
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
I had a call coming in about the same time. Okay. Now, everybody knows that where you guys have you guys have talked about history and how your history lessons have gone as far as Russian. And I'm listening and I'm like, if you think yours is bad, come to America. And I grew up in this, I was in grade school in 70s, high schools in the 80s. And really our whole history of Russia had to do with the Bolshevik revolution. Revolutions. And that pretty much was it until you get to the Cold War. And, that was kind of glossed over. You learned about Nikita Khrushchev and that whole thing with the Cuban Missile Crisis. So you think yours is bad. Ours was a lot worse. and to find out about the individual countries that made up the Soviet Union. Yeah, we knew about Poland when the tanks stormed into Poland. That we learned about that, but everything else, all the other countries, bear to let me say none. And that was, and of course, you know, the Berlin Wall. That was the other extent of it. So there wasn't a lot to what you get. You guys thought you were deficient. Ours was a lot more deficient, and that included even our neighbors to the north, Canada. Uh, we got to Canada being territories, and that's probably about where it ended too. About the trade, the fur trade in Canada, and then the expansion into the Ohio River Valley area and the war and whatnot. So now going to the genocides. Um, the thing that I want to move. Okay, you guys have talked about, you know, the different peoples being eradicated. In the case of Ukraine now, what there is the issue of the future, repopulating these areas so that they are not bereft of enough people to have it populated so that you don't have another situation of little green men being able to do what they did in the Donbass region. So that's would be my focus right now, is getting those areas repopulated with enough people, not just people moving in and moving back, but enough. When you've had as many people in Bucha, Irpin, and Mariupol, these places that were killed or disappeared.
Strong fences make good neighbors.
Yes, but you also need people. You need people to move into those areas and repopulate, reindustrialize, re, um, make it viable, make it really viable as far as business and technology and industry.
Mishpracha is up.
Nu, was macht?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm joining you so late. I'm studying. I'm burning the midnight oil for the exam. Wish me luck.
Okay, you got it.
Thanks, brother.
Now go study. Now go study.
Yeah, no, I'm picking up food for the warden, you see. Life's tough. All right, what's new? What's new?
Chris is about to tell us what's new. He's been extremely patient.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. I had a question for Maddie. I read your report, Maddie, a few weeks ago about Ruski Mir. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but the Russian world. And as I was reading it, found it very disturbing. It reminded me of the Hitler's Reich, the German realm. It's not just a nice, pleasant little organization like the Goethe Institute that's trying to spread German culture around the world. It's also got this expansionary side to it that wants to expand and dominate its neighbors. It seemed to be very similar to the Nazi kind of philosophy and ideology. And then I heard more recently about Alexander Dugin and his holy war against the West. And, so I wondered about the link and connection, similarity between Dugin's philosophy or ideology and Ruski Mir and also the German Third Reich. So if you could comment, that'd be great. Thanks, Maddie.
Sure. So the concept of Ruski Mir, or the Russian world, or it's correctly translated, ethnic Russian world, is not well defined by the Russians themselves, and it's done on purpose. It's kind of left a bit nebulous. But the closest definition that we've ever got, the official definition, is actually coming from Putin himself. You remember that speech where Putin mentioned that the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. People usually stop quoting him right there, but he actually continued that speech and mentioned that there was a significant tragedy that he called it a bit of a drama, that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, many of by our he meant Russian compatriots, were left abroad on primordially ethnic Russian lands that were out of the jurisdiction of the Russian Federation. So that gives you an idea of what they consider to be the Ruski Mir.
That sounds very familiar, doesn't it?
It sounds identical to Lebensraum of the Third Reich.
Living
Anschluss.
space.
Anschluss.
Yeah.
Yep.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. When I think of Ruski Mir, I think of like, imagine you have a door-to-door salesman who's trying to sell you like literal garbage, and you're looking at the person, there's a big disconnect. You're like, really? You want me to buy this? Oh yeah, it's the best thing in the world, and it's like doesn't work. And you're like, wow, that's the disconnect that Westerners have with these concepts, because they just make no sense.
So the Russians themselves don't quite understand it. The Kremlin propaganda is using these terms to specify what they consider to be their lands. Basically, anything outside of Russia that used to be part of the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union is included. So I'd even go as far as to say that they probably want Finland back, but obviously that would never happen. As I mentioned before, they're not stupid. They're not going to fight with NATO. So they might limit themselves only to non-NATO members of the former Russian Empire. And one of the Ukrainian journalists, his name is Volodymyr Zolkin, interviewed, I think at this point, more than 200 Russian POWs. And he generally asks this specific question to the Russians: "What is Ruski Mir?" And guess what? Most of them don't even know what it is. They just, some of them provide kind of a specific answer, but others stumble. Some of the specific answers just include exactly that. Anything that used to be Russian needs to be back in Russia, or anything that used to belong to the Russian Empire needs to be back in Russia. So it could be, the definition could be twofold. It could be either territorial, so anything that is used to be part of the Russian Empire, or it could be cultural as well. That's why they're so obsessive about all the Russian speakers out there. That concept of Russian speakers is actually a bit more extensive. So by that definition, even Brighton Beach in New York City could be part of this Ruski Mir. There's also a cultural foundation called Ruski Mir. I forget the official definition, but Chris, if you read the thread, I have it in there. It's officially sponsored by the state of the Russian Federation, and it is used extensively throughout the world as a soft power tool to project their cultural influence, to project their political influence. So that's how you see the Russians are weaponizing the culture. That's why you've seen many people, and I see Aluna down there in the listeners. Maybe she might want to talk about it. Why Russian culture is so dangerous and why it's so toxic? Not because it's evil, because it's Russian. It's just used by the Russian state as a tool in propaganda, as a tool in propaganda warfare. It's just another instrument that they extensively utilize.
Yeah, can I jump in there?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Matty. I can't find your thread anymore. It's not right at the top, so I'll have another look. But yeah, that's good. That when that journalist had interviewed the soldiers, and they didn't know what Rusky Mir was. It reminded me of a documentary I saw just before the invasion started. There was an Australian journalist who was in that area, in the Donbass area, and was asking people on both sides. And there was a Russian-speaking young woman, and there was a lot of talk about Nazis. And this journalist asked this young woman, "So, what do you mean when you talk about Nazis here? And we haven't really seen them. What is a Nazi anyway?" And this young woman, I'm not sure if she was Russian, just over the border, or she was in the Donbass area. I'm not sure, but anyway, her answer was that she didn't really know, but she said, "Well, I think it's people that don't like Russians." And I'll just stop there.
Daryl, go ahead.
Yeah, Matty, I got a question, and this has to do with Tsarist Russia and Communist Russia. How you considering that there was a revolution to rid the country of the Tsars and all that it stood for? Is there any conflict in the idea of what Russia is or was? Not the Soviet Union, but what Russia was, because they are now encapsulating what the Tsar had conquered to be Russia. And so if the people were to be quote unquote free from the Tsarist rule, how do they reconcile that idea that these people are not Russians and they are free? They were free, yet, you had, it's like they want the cake and eat it too, so to speak. They want the Tsarist thing, what the Tsar had, but they want to call it Russian now. If I'm making any sense with this, because it's almost like, okay, you got rid of the Tsar just to take what the Tsar had, and you're doing this, and basically you running the country quite similar to what he did. If you understand my meaning with that.
I understand your question. Yes. So when the Russian Empire fell in 1917, a number of sorry, Daryl, there's a lot of feedback coming from you.
Let me go mute here.
Yeah, so when the Russian Empire fell in 1917, and the so-called Russian Civil War, by the way, I hate that name. It's there was a civil war, right? But it was more than just a Russian Civil War. But given that this is the name that is officially used and that is stuck, fine, I'll call it that. When the Russian Civil War broke out, many of the colonial possessions of the Russian Empire decided to break away. One of them was Ukraine. Another example is the Northern Mountainous Federation, Northern Mountainous Confederate Republic, if I recall correctly. So basically, all the republics in the Northern Caucasus. The other one was the Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. They all broke away. A number of states in Central Asia broke away. So what the communists did, what the Reds did, is they fought everyone at the same time. They fought the whites, they fought the national liberation movements. So now you see where this is going, right? They did want to topple the Tsar, but didn't want the empire to die. The Soviet Union was nothing more than a reimagined Russian Empire. Think of it as Russian Empire 2.0. Sure, there was no Tsar as a political figure anymore, but there was the party now. The seat of power transferred from St. Petersburg into Moscow, but it was still an imperial center. They had this idea of multiculturalism, the international, that was promoted by the communists as a propaganda tool in the 20th of 1920s. But they quickly abandoned it in the 1930s. They started killing all the intellectuals of non-ethnic Russian origin, they started repressing. Well, they did Holodomor and all the other genocides and other parts of the reimagined Russian Empire. They forcibly deported a number of ethnic groups that were not Russian throughout the empire. They continued doing it in the 1940s. So when you really think about it, it was a just another version of the Russian Empire, just as genocidal, probably even more so, because genocides perpetrated by the Soviet Union were actually well, let's just put it this way, just as genocidal.
The Chinese surpassed them only. That's it.
Yeah. So
we didn't call it the Russian Revolution when I studied it. It was the Russian Civil War. It was the Bolshevik Revolution, and they didn't want to change their borders. They just wanted to kill off all the intelligentsia and the perceived titular heads and give the power to the people, so to speak. As you know,
I think what Matt is really saying is that whole interaction was really a transfer of power, of ownership from the Tsar to a party. There was no desire to liberate national peoples or anything like that.
Yeah, it wasn't a struggle for liberation. They just wanted to change one bad guy out for another.
Yeah,
or one bad family out for a bad guy.
And that's exactly my, what I was going with this, is because it's like, okay, you don't have a Tsar, but you have a political party leader who is worse than what you had prior to. So, I know the Tsars were bad,
The Tsars were super bad.
Exactly. But, Lenin, Stalin, you didn't get much better.
No, but the reason why those guys got banned with is because they told the people we're going to make it better than the Tsar, but that was a lie.
It was all smoke and mirrors.
So just to round it off really quickly, what you're seeing right now is a third iteration of the Russian Empire that is a bit smaller, well, not a bit, quite a bit smaller, with a smaller resource base, with a smaller population. And yeah, that's why they're so hell bent on rebirthing their empire. So yeah, there you have it.
Oh, Alex, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I understand where Daryl's question is coming from. I think and Marty has outlined the whole issue quite excellently. I'd say the cognitive dissonance that arises from that is on our side, not on the Russian side, because of the way we study and view history in phases, whereas usually those sort of phases are just neat boxes that we can put things in so we can categorize them, rather than having any real application, if that makes sense. So we delineate it as Marty says, this highly complex geopolitical event. We label that the Russian Revolution or the Bolshevik Revolution or the Russian Civil War. It doesn't really, and we say, okay, then we have the Soviet Union, then we have this. Those are just ways of identifying broad periods of time. And so when we try and say, oh, well, this should have happened and this should have happened, doesn't really work like that. And as Marty and Yehuda have both pointed out, just because just because you change the label on the tin, it doesn't change the contents. And that's, yeah.
And back to, I think the original question or point that Chris made, I think one of the reasons that Putin's Russia is so successful in selling this Nazi idea and disassociating themselves or the Russians from that mentality is because they have a totally different historical frame of reference from the Western world. Because for Russians, even ones that have, studied history a little more closely than your average person living out in rural Siberia, their remembrance of history and what the Nazis did was that they came and attacked and massacred a bunch of Russians. They didn't find out about all of the Jews that were exterminated in Western Europe until after the Nazis had attacked a bunch of Russians. So they have a lot of success selling that mentality within Russia. Anybody who's anti-Russian is equivalent to a Nazi. And it, nothing could be further from the truth, but that doesn't take away from their ability to sell it within the borders of Russia.
I want to make a statement. I'm going to say it, and I'll stand by it. I mean, it's an old movie reference, but I'm sure it's not lost on people. The reason why, for some of us who are, we're not pro-Ukraine or we're not, I'm unbiasedly, pro-Ukrainian. There is no real option. It's not about being pro-Ukraine. It's about being pro-humanity, a common sense, freedom, democracy. These aren't just words. We used to say these words after 1991. It was a bit of a joke. No one really thought, because there was no major world threat to it. But I want to say, like, for those who are they're not sure, just to dumb it down, not that people are dumb, but just to dumb it down, is if I was to give the simplest explanation as to what Russia represents to the world versus the free world, where people have a say in what they believe, and where education and knowledge and innovation and ingenuity is celebrated and encouraged, Russia's basically like the Planet of the Apes. Right? Remember the movie Planet of the Apes? When I think of Russia today, I think of Planet of the Apes, and the Americans are the, whoever that actor was, Charlton Heston. He's the American astronaut who lands. I feel like when we talk about Russia today, I feel like Charlton Heston in Planet of the Apes. I've landed in a dystopian world where clowns run the show, and that's really, they're somewhat sophisticated.
We're losing you, Yehuda. Yehuda,
I
you're
got
dropping.
a phone call. Yeah, I got a phone call. But imagine someone from Planet of the Apes is trying to tell you that their world is way better than yours. And if you disagree with us, you're racist or you're a bigot. And you're kind of thinking to yourself, this doesn't make any sense. They have names that I think of, they're words that I can relate to. But the reality is the output that Russia has is literally Planet of the Apes style level. They're like 1950s world. But it's one thing to be, not so sophisticated. It's another thing to not be so effective, or your country can't really produce much. But it's another thing to have and live in that society and try to lie to the world and say you're really special. Like, we are the best. Russia, for those who are interested, you're not the best. You're barely cutting the mustard. And we're seeing that play out in their technology, in their military, and in their political process, which they claim is democratic. It's literally, I honestly, I can't get away from it. I don't know how it got in my mind. Maybe I saw Planet of the Apes on Netflix, and I thought, you know what, that reminds me of Russia. That's where we're at. It's a very backward society. Call it for what it is. But it's one thing, again, to be backwards. You could say, well, everyone develops differently and all countries are different. But it's another thing to say you're the best thing in the world and possibly be some of the worst. And that's where we're at. I don't know what you think of that. Is that controversial? Who knows? What time is it? Where are my kids? Ben, Craig, Ricardo, Daryl.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, along that note, all my life, my family's from the islands, and all my life I wish Cuba would open up to, we would open relations with Cuba for that exact reason, because it seems like, you see the pictures, beautiful place, but it was left in a time warp. And when we finally halfway started opening up to them, they didn't move along. They remained exactly where they were, and that ball has not moved. And so when you talk about that whole 1950s thing, that's what I think of, is the exact thing that's where Cuba is. 1950s, stuck with the 1950s cars, etc.
No, they have newer Ladas as well. I've
No,
actually went.
yeah, but Ryan, but as to what Daryl's saying, and not just that though, I've been to Cuba several times. It's a Canadian, we can go, but they're convinced that they're like on top of the world, like they're advanced, they're modern, and it's just so strange. You don't say anything just to be polite. You just okay, great job. But that's the same thing, right? I mean, it's one thing for whatever curious aspect of history that your country is not so developed, but it's another thing to be like so cocksure that you're running the world and everyone wants to be you. Like it's just bizarre, right? The disconnect, the cognitive dissonance is so great. I have a hard time understanding it, right? I mean, a part of me wants to shake them and go, hello, has anyone reminded you you're Russia? You're not developing anything. I mean, you're not an empire. You don't contribute to the world like you think you do. You put a monkey in space. Who really cares? Or a dog? I don't even know. That was a long time ago, and you pretty much spent your entire country's budget to do it while everyone died. And the Americans did it while fostering a democracy and did great things. That's how the Soviet Union collapsed. They tried to keep up with the United States. They didn't have the logistics. They didn't have the background to keep up with the states. So they were able to put up a show, faking it. They wanted to fake it until they made it, but they never made it. And why are we still talking about them like they're some potent force? Russia's not going to win this. They're not going to win the war. They're not going to mobilize to fight Ukrainians. There are no bombs aren't dropping on Moscow. But Ukrainians aren't butchering Russian children like the Russians are butchering Ukrainian children. I mean, every consideration that can be had or understood about the invasion of Ukraine works only one way. And we had a Ukrainian journalist today. What did she say? She came up and she wouldn't even crap on Russian speakers in Ukraine. No, everyone's different. It's the language they speak. I mean, these are, you don't get better than this, right? It's a Narnia, Lord of the Rings style battle. Evil orcs, I hate to say it, don't like using that term, but it truly is the good versus the bad. And every opportunity, I always say, you remember, I've always said the Russians are not irredeemable. They're damn close, though. You have Alushta, please, I like very much Crimea. It's a very nice place I stole. Now I have to go homes. And it's almost like a joke. Like you literally, you do know your country invaded Crimea. You do know that you're living in someone else's house. How do you know that? Pictures of other people's family in the house when you stole it. And now you're crying and you want sympathy that you have to go home? Cuckoo. It's beyond bizarre. So I think I'm glad that we all recognize it. And I think we need to we can't let that drop. We can't just go by and talk about military updates and, what European leaders are saying. Russia is as a political entity, is a psychotic monolith moving towards destruction, and they don't care who they take down. But with information, with understanding, with an open mind, we can help continue to spread the message of what's going on in Ukraine. And sorry, I think I've gone on too long.
It's really hard to make them care that their economy is collapsing and they're living essentially a second or third class existence, and make them care that they never made it to the moon because they're too high on propaganda to realize any of that.
I'd like to just observe just one thing. There was a great photo taken by one of the reporters. I'm going to go to Richard and Madi just really quickly, but this is a great image. I'm going to try and find it so I can share it in the nest. It is this Russian propaganda video that shows the poor suffering white Russian, I should emphasize, white Russian wife with her daughter in the kitchen. And I kid you not, like this is a real thing. It's not photoshopped. I've checked it. I fact checked it. It's literally this video of them making dinner without their husband. There's a picture of her husband's picture, like in the kitchen. He's on the wall. She opens the refrigerator door, and on the refrigerator door in Ukrainian is a 2-year warranty in Ukrainian, because they stole the refrigerator and the kitchen. I don't know who else has seen that photo, but that's a whole other level of like zeitgeist that you just cannot get through. It's almost impossible to break through that. Like your husband stole a refrigerator and it has the Ukrainian warranty on it, 2-year warranty, and you're crying that what is actually going on here? Do we all need to sit down on the couch and have a moment and reflect for a second? But
intervention.
That's the word I'm looking for. Okay, so I know Madi wanted to say something, so we're gonna go Madi, Richard, Clyde, please.
Oh no, it's fine. I didn't have my hand raised.
I'm sorry. I thought you dropped it. Let's go to Ricardo and then
you have to talk now.
Yeah,
we need a 3-minute Madi monologue, and I'm tongue twisted here.
If you guys didn't listen to Yehuda's conversation with Olga today, it's what he's getting at. I mean, she cut through our hearts, and she cut through exactly what Yehuda is saying, that our souls, and the way she put it, I mean, everybody's redeemable, and it did cut through, is what he's saying. And if you didn't hear it, you need to go back and listen to it. And so there is, there are refrigerators, there's all this other stuff that we talk about, the bombs and whatnot. But Yehuda had a heart-to-heart conversation with Olga today that touched many people. And she is not worried about all of that. She's worried about the genocide. She's worried about the small things. And Yehuda, I would like for you to just kind of give a brief from your heart what you felt when you were interviewing her today, because I think it touched a lot of people.
No, thanks for that. Well, when she spoke, it wasn't just her stoicism, or even her lack of interest to reach out and grab those low hanging fruits. I felt I was talking to like maybe a Jewish person in Germany after World War II, where like you knew she was dedicated and committed to the Ukrainian cause, but she wasn't throwing away any hope with the Russians. Like she still had that in her, and she spoke to that in my mind through language and culture. She said, she talked about her friends who still speak Russian, who are trying to speak Ukrainian, who are Ukrainians, but these are people who have been, Russified and forced to speak Russian. And I just thought it was such a high road she took, where she wasn't saying, "Oh, the Russians are all animals, they're all pigs, they're all gross, they're this and that." She said, "No, it was very, very measured." And you want to know something? I'd love to say Olga's an exception, but she's not. Ukrainians are very reasonable, rational people. They know that these Russians have been fed a diet of this BS for their whole lives. A generation of Putin supporters, literally in the early 20s, they were born when Putin came to power. I just thought that was so admirable and classy. I mean, classy is the word I'd use. She's just a classy individual who didn't, she wasn't out for clicks or whatever, this or that. And she said, it might not be popular, but there are, this is who we are as a people, and it's not bad that Ukrainians speak Russian, and it doesn't make us less Ukrainian. And in the middle of a genocide, you'd think, my reaction, having a Ukrainian wife, is, F that, my kids will not even speak Russian. I don't want them to listen to, their grandmother's TV stuff in Russian, even though she's Ukrainian. And here she's like, that's not important. That's not what's important here, and I think that Olga represents the best of what Ukraine is and what it has to offer. For me, it was a special interview and a chat, really. It wasn't really an interview. And I really hope people do go back and listen to it because, sophisticated, erudite, but more importantly, I think what I always heard out of Olga's mouth was kindness and understanding. And the fact that she didn't lose her humanity because the Russians never had any says a lot about Ukraine, about the national spirit, about the respect for human rights, overall, an intelligent perspective. So,
and diversity.
Diversity.
The lifeblood of any good democracy is diversity.
Yeah.
Of opinion and culture and everything else.
Yep. So,
Yehuda, didn't you feel like? Yeah, you did. And didn't you feel like she's kind of the person we want to be? I mean, in a strange level. I mean, it was like her heart today. And you're right. It was a conversation. It was not so much an interview. And the interaction between the two of you was classic. And I think that she came across as, no, I'm not bitter. um, it is about democracy. It is about humanity, and I think that's something that the Ukrainians could teach all of us. Don't you agree?
100%. I mean, Olga spoke as if she was like a survivor of a genocide, but 50 years later, looking back after reflecting. But to be in the middle of it and have that composure, to me, that gave me pause. All right. I mean, this is a person who eh, hasn't lost hope. She is still looking forward for a future for her children, for her daughter, for her compatriots, her confreres. And here she was just speaking, very matter of factly. And again, it's I mean, for those who've not experienced death or been to war, or have heard stories of family members in the Holocaust or whatever, it might not mean as much. But I mean, I have family members and friends who 50 years after the Holocaust never let it go, and I could never tell them to let it go, but they were so furious and upset about what the Nazis did to their family. But here's a person going through a genocide, and it's almost like she had this calmness about her, where she said, we'll persevere, we'll make it through, and I'm not going to lose my humanity. Again, it's the Russians can steal lives, they can steal land, they can steal treasure and wealth, but apparently what they've not stolen is the human spirit from the Ukrainians, and that's the greatest victory Ukraine will always have.
And she was rebuilding in her own mind uh, with war going on. Like she's already looking at the future, and I know that you and her talked about some of the things you guys are going to do with the genocide victims, but she's already going. I mean, she's in the middle of this, but she's already positive and going and looking at the future.
Well, and back to Yehuda's point, it's completely understandable for somebody who's survived traumatic experiences like that to let it um, impress into their psyche, or to become bitter. I would absolutely become bitter if my family and friends were genocided, and I totally understand that. But her resilience and refusal to allow that to corrupt her spirit and to leave her bitter is a testament to Ukrainian resolve.
Hey, Alona messaged me. She wanted to speak about the interview with Olga. Is she trying? Can you see if
she was trying to come up a little bit ago, and we had a full space. I could not bring her in because we had.
If we could
12,
do that, let's
listeners
be
queued up.
important, not to sound.
No, I was
not to
trying
sound
to get her in.
Yeah, not to sound clickbaity, but she's a Ukrainian female voice, and I think through speaking about Olga's experience as a Ukrainian woman, I wouldn't mind hearing Alona's take on it or feedback.
I absolutely was trying to get her up. I didn't have a chance to cut in and drop somebody from the panel.
We also have issues with when we can't. Sometimes when you request to speak, dear audience, it goes into a loop where it just looks like you're connecting, but you're not. And it's not because we don't want to let you speak or come up. It's just simply a matter of the Twitter lords not liking us. So, yeah, thanks, Ryan. Take it away. We got Clyde. Hopefully, we get Alona.
Yep. If Alona is in the speaker gallery, please request. I'll be happy to bring you up. We have some issues from time to time. I know Joseph's phone does not allow him to see speaker requests depending on which night he's co-hosting, and that's always fun. Yehuda, if you want to DM her, maybe. There she is.
She's already emailed. Yes, I didn't bring it up.
Perfect.
Without
I didn't know if she was listening or not. Clyde, you've been waiting forever. Thank you for being patient. Go ahead next, and then we'll get to Donnie and Alana.
listening to this conversation and a lot of the pieces of some of the interviews over the last day, it as an American who knows way too little about Asia, it seems like the thought came to me that part of what is going on with Russia is that the ethnic Russians or Muscovy or however you want to say it, deep down are scared to death of all of their other countrymen. If the Kazakhs and the Siberians and all these people in the Caucasus that I've never heard of before today, and all these different people groups, the Georgians and the Chechens, if they all sort of rose up at once, I mean, they would probably exact some revenge for the last 500 years worth of oppression. And so deep down, are they really insecure and scared, and that's why they act like this? I mean, it's just a question. And then that's one question. And then the second thing is that what happens once this is over? I mean, you can't just take 7 time zones worth of landmass worth of people and just have them go stand in the corner for 100 years until they get civilized. I mean, how does that work its way out? To have some semblance. I mean, it's too many people and too big a landmass to just to do like Serbia and just have them go sit in the corner. You can't do that. I mean, how does this work? How does this work? I'm asking. So thank you, and I'll listen.
Don't everybody come off mute all at once. Mahdi, go ahead.
Ryan, yeah. Something I've said before, and I say it today, and I'm going to say it again. Kazakhstan is an independent country. Yes, there are ethnic Kazakhs living in Russia, but they have an option. They can move to Kazakhstan. That's it. So, of course, there are parts of the Kazakh Khanate that were captured by the Russian Empire that are still within Russia, but let's be honest, we don't want those lands back because they're heavily Russified and they're full of ethnic Russians, and yeah, we don't want that problem. They can keep it. Russia has 11 time zones, so most of the Russian population lives. So 75% of population of the Russian Federation lives west of the Ural Mountains. In terms of how to solve it, Clyde, I think we had a very long conversation yesterday where we were just saying that the Russian Federation needs to be decolonized. All of the territories east of the Ural Mountains are obvious colonies. They need to be dismissed from the third iteration of the Russian Empire. And so we've also got the Southern Caucasus, Northern Caucasus. Those need to be dismissed from the empire. We've got the Karelia, or Karelo-Finskaya Autonomous Respublika, which used to be part of Finland, but who's counting, and so on and so forth. So the answer is complex and simple, but could be boiled down to decolonization.
Just to add what, as Marty says, it's a complex and simple proposition at the same time. And one of the things that Moscow has done very well is play off local and regional interests off against each other. So while it sounds like a simple proposition to say, well, to pick a region, the North Caucasus could throw off the Russian yoke tomorrow if they wanted to, and the key thing is that if they wanted to. But because of the way local and regional interests have been manipulated for the last 500 years, there's just not that conception of being able to rise up and throw off the Russian yoke, as it were. I don't know if you would agree, Marty.
Yeah, I think about a month ago, we talked about the Second Chechen War and how the Chechens actually won the first war, but